On the next episode of Painting and Travel, Roger and Sarah Batsmer take time to enjoy Florida's Gulf of Mexico and the unspoiled paradise of Caladesi Island. We'll explore white sand beaches as Roger sets up his easel.
Wow, what a beautiful spot. I think we can paint right in here. What do you think, Sarah?
It looks like a great spot, a peaceful setting.
I love it. Well, we'll get off the boat and let's get started. Good. Wow, this is wonderful. Great spot, Harvey. Here we are at Caladesi Island. This is on the west coast of Florida, right near Clearwater. We've got a nice gray day here. I like the idea that we're not out in the bright sunlight, so I may set up my easel right here on this palm tree that's fallen down. Look, there's a beautiful osprey that's flying up there. We've got some dolphin behind the boat that just threw a fish up in the air. Wow, that's marvelous.
I brought a half easel today, which is what I mostly use out in the field because it doesn't take up much space and it's adequate for the size painting I'm going to do. Got some beautiful dark clouds back there. I've got a storm front moving in. Hopefully I'll be able to finish this little painting before it rains. I'm using acrylic paints today and I'm using a masonite board. This is just 1/8 inch masonite covered with gesso, and I've primed it with a thin coat of burnt umber and burnt sienna. Just gives it a nice warm tone to start my painting on. I have a small glass palette here. I'm going to put my paints on there. It works very nicely. One reason I like the glass palette here, and this was Sarah's idea, is I don't have to reach way down here on the ground in order to get my paints. I'll have my board that I'm going to paint on here, and I can easily go back and forth between my paints and my painting. And I can also, at that time, see exactly what color I have here that I'm going to place here, and that's often helpful. I just attach this with a little screw back here so it doesn't fall off. And I can just put my masonite board up here. And when it's windy, these boards can blow over, and it's happened more than once to me. It can make an awful mess. So I just have a little carriage bolt here. This doesn't slide down far enough to hold this in place, but this little carriage bolt lets me put this back here, just holds it right there, just enough so the board doesn't blow over.
What have you decided to paint?
I've got some beautiful palm trees back here. Got a little bit of a beach, and makes a nice little S-curve around here, which always I like because it leads my eye into the painting. So I've got some nice simple shapes, and I'm always after simplicity in my paintings. So I think I'll just use this palm tree here that's fallen down and set up, and this makes a perfect location.
It's a little like Robinson Crusoe to me.
Yeah, it sure is. Got some water. Well, everything's set. This is just fabulous. We couldn't ask for anything better. Put out my acrylic paints, and we'll get started.
Visitors can enjoy Caladesi Island State Park by using the ferry service, which runs daily. This natural habitat is the home to many birds such as osprey, American egret, the blue heron, yellow-crowned night heron, ibis, and the occasional roseate spoonbill. On the bay side, docking is easy with plenty of slips, and a well-stocked concession stand is a good place for a light lunch. Caladesi Island is narrow, but stretches 3.5 miles from north to south and has about 3 miles of hiking trails that wind through unspoiled areas of mangroves and stands of pine trees. A short walk brings us to the white sandy beach and the Gulf of Mexico, where shelling is a favorite pastime for most everyone who visits, and there are always lots of shells to choose from.
Well, we've gotten set up here, and it looks like the clouds and the rain showers are going to hold off, at least until I get a small painting done. I brought some brushes with me today, of course, and these are mostly flats in different sizes. Brought a couple of fan brushes. One's a nice new fan brush. The other one is pretty raggedy, but it's good for doing some weeds and that sort of thing. And I just brought one little pointed brush for details. I'm using acrylic paints. I'll put out some titanium white, ultramarine blue, Indian yellow, alizarin crimson, and a color that I didn't use for years, but now I've grown accustomed to using it, and I'll tell you why a little bit later, but that's black. Ever since art school, I was taught never to use black. It's really the absence of color. As long as we're doing paintings, you need to use color, but gray is also an important factor in painting landscapes. There are two very important parts of creating a painting. One is observation, to be able to look at nature and see things clearly. It doesn't have to be nature, it can be whatever you're painting. It has to be seen clearly. If I were a horticulturist and I were to come out here, I would see this totally different than a painter. I would look at these palmettos and maybe wonder what nutrients they're growing in and how things grow in the sand. I would look at these red mangroves and study them. I would look at them totally differently with my eyes. But as a painter, we look at things with color, we look at things with form. So painters hopefully see things a little bit differently. And when a photographer or an artist does a painting, we have to create certain things. One of those is a center of interest. We don't really concern ourselves with that just by looking around in a normal fashion. But the other thing that's very important is interpretation. First, I have my water with me. Another very important thing I always bring out is a little atomizer. This will keep my paint wet and my board a little bit damp so the paint slides around on it a little bit easier. It's quite damp out here today, so I don't think I'll have the problem I normally do as if it were sunny. Just going to pick up a few colors. It really doesn't matter what colors I choose here to begin with to lay this out, but I need to sketch in a little bit of a composition. I don't want the horizon line in the center of my painting. That never looks good. Well, sometimes it can work. But in this case, I think I'll put the horizon line a little bit below center, simply because I have these nice palm trees up here. The three primary colors I have on my palette are transparent colors, meaning whatever color is underneath will show through. I've just put 3 more colors over here on the right, and they are opaque colors. I'll explain more in another program what effect all this has on painting, as they function very differently. But for now, I'm using only transparent colors. Got a beautiful cabbage palm there. It's Florida's state tree. And we have some slash pines here in the background. It's very important to get down the big basic shapes right off the bat. I'm getting that horizon line awfully close to the center, but I'm going to ignore that because I do want to get as much of the beach in as possible, and I also love these palm trees up here. So it's a bit of a dilemma, but it is a little bit below center. Acrylics dry so quickly that it's easy to correct your mistakes too. I haven't used black at all yet, nor will I use it very often. I don't use the black to make things blacker or darker. I use the black primarily to make my light colors grayer. I'll put in a little bit of a sky now. Still, I'm not going to pick up any black. I'm just going to make a warm gray. In painting, a good question to ask yourself is this a cool color or a warm color? Now I'm going to put the sky on here, and since the sky is, of course, lit by the sun, which is above these clouds, part of the sky is going to be warm, part of it's going to be cool. There's two types of light at play here, really one type today. There's two primary sources of light, and that's sunlight, which is always warm, and then the light of the sky, and that's always cool. Sometimes, if the sun is hitting these thin clouds, it's going to be a little bit warmer in color. If the cloud's a little bit thick, or we're seeing sky, it's going to be a cool color. It's almost, I can use maybe a comparison of going into a room that's full of fluorescent lights. That would be your sky. And then having a big spotlight, that would be the sun. So even though people think, well, we've only have one source of light, which is the sun, for a painter, there's actually two sources of light. And that cool source, which is the sky, is what gives us the blue shadows on the ground, the blue cool shadows. If the sun were out really bright today, and we were to look at, say, this log here, the sun on the sun hitting this side of the log would be warm, this side would be cool. This is getting the reflected light from the sky, this would be getting it from the sun. So I'll mix up a warm gray color here. I haven't used any black yet, but it's definitely a nice warm color. If I were to just use black and white there, this would be very dead looking. So black has its uses, but not necessarily in just making things darker. Another thing that's very true about sky almost always, is that it's always cooler towards the zenith than it is down towards the horizon. So I may warm this up just a little bit down at the horizon here. And since I have the opportunity to interpret what I see, I can make changes as I wish. Big basic shapes is a good way to set a solid foundation to a painting. So here we have several big basic shapes. We've got the sky, we've got this area of trees. Now within this set of trees, there are, of course, lots of trees, lots of things going on, but as an artist, I want to see this as one large shape to begin with. And from there, I can add these other shapes within it. But if this were to get lost as one big shape, my center of interest and my focus would be gone. Now, as I look at this beach, I compare the temperature of the sky to the temperature of the sand, and the sand is definitely a warmer color. So I'll add a little more yellow, a little more red to this. Still no black. There, you can see the difference there. The process of painting is all about comparisons, and often when I put a color on the canvas that I think is just right in tone and value and so on, when I put another color next to it, it often throws it off, and I have to make these adjustments all the time. This is a great day for studying color because everything is very subtle out here today. It's very gray. Often gray paintings aren't very exciting, but if the sun were to come out now, it might cast a nice sliver of light somewhere, maybe in the background. And once I get this painting finished, I can, by using interpretation, I can maybe change things and maybe add a sliver of light here or maybe in the background. We'll see. Now that I've got these big areas, I've got three big basic areas. These trees, the sky, the beach. Nice, simple composition. Now I can go in and work my details out in these big areas. Pick up a little bit of cadmium yellow light here because it's opaque. I can still keep that a nice dark color. I like to work from dark to light. When I'm looking at these palmettos, the light colors are always outside the dark areas. All the dark areas are tucked back in, all the weeds and everything. So they're just naturally in the background. So it makes sense to start with these dark areas and then pull out all my areas like these palmettos into lighter colors. Even when doing parts of a painting, are what parts are cool and what parts are warm. And as I look at these trees back here, I see these pine trees as being a little bit warmer than these palmettos. So I'll try and keep that in mind as I paint too. As things move back in the distance, they tend to get less contrast and grayer and a little bit bluer because of the atmosphere. So these Clearwater Beach back here, there's quite a bit of atmosphere between me and the beach. It's maybe 3/4 of a mile. So there's going to be a lot of moisture and things get a little bit less contrast. I don't see as much detail. So I'll pick up a little bit of blue and yellow. It's still green back there, but I'll add some white to it, gray that down. That gives a little bit of distance. I want, as best I can, to create as many layers of this painting as I can. To everything in the foreground, I want a little bit sharper, a little bit more detail, a little bit more color, a little bit more contrast. As things move back, I want that all to disappear a little bit. Also, the edge back here should be much softer than the edges in the foreground. The important part of this palm tree lies at the edge of the form. That's what's going to give it the description. As you can see, it's just a silhouette now, but you can tell it's a palm tree, well, almost, but just by what the edge is. There's really nothing in the center at all. So I'm always aware that what the edge of the form does really describes the object. This painting will be finished in the studio, so I want to get the essence of what I'm looking at out here. It's always a difficult word and exactly what that means, but I just want to get the nice feeling. One thing I can do with a painting that I can't do with a photograph is really bring people into the painting, and it has some emotional value that often photographs just don't have. And the reason is because I can focus, or the painter can focus on an area that he wants the person to be interested in. In a photograph, everything is equal. But here I can say, this is what's important, or this is what's important. It's very nice that this dark brownish color here can come through and give me this warmth. It even comes through on the sky in places and bits and pieces. So without really even trying, this brown gives me a nice overall warm tone to start with. And a lot of these colors will just come through and they'll stay there even in the finished painting. I notice in many good paintings that I look at, that I can look at the painting and I can say, this is a yellow painting, or this is a green painting, or this is a blue painting. And this tone underneath will help me keep that flavor of that warmth. These are very beautiful red mangroves growing here. These do a lot to the environment to help keep pollutants out of the water and estuaries for fish and so on. And they're interesting because these mangroves grow these little, I call them sea pencils. And they hang on the bush, they hang on the mangrove tree, and at some point they just drop off and they stick in the sand, or they float away. And at some point they root themselves. Here's one that just got out of the ground. And you can see by here this root, it grows, and now you've got a whole new mangrove. And we found this one, and we'll plant it back in the sand there before we leave. But you know what? This is just a little bit too warm for me. This is I've gotten this very red down here. And like I said, it's always a matter of comparison here. And I'm not afraid to change things when they need changing. So it seems a little more yellow than it does pink. So I'm going to try and change this color. And I'll warm that up just a bit. That's better. And that's good too, because it adds a little more texture in there, in the beach. Still hear some dolphin in the background there, splashing away. Here I talked about black, using black, and so far I haven't even picked it up and used it at all. But it was there for me to use, and I still might use it. I found I don't need a whole lot of palette real estate in order to do a painting. One reason is I'm using so few colors to begin with, and the other advantage of using so few colors is whatever I do here tends to be more harmonious because I'm not branching out into a lot of other strange colors. So what I use here is just naturally going to give me some harmony. Years ago, this area used to be filled with mullet. You could just see them, and they're just black in the water almost and just bubble to the surface. Now there aren't so many. Things change. But this is a glorious, peaceful area to do a painting in, and Mother Nature certainly has cooperated today. I call these sky holes. These sky holes have to be darker than this sky. If they're not a little bit darker than the sky, they're going to look a lot brighter than the sky. And that's because of the contrast between these light and darks. I have to be aware that these sky holes are not just randomly placed holes. They have to describe the branches and the leaves that I'm looking through there. It's getting a little bit brighter out, so before things change any further, this is a tool that every artist should carry with them, a camera, digital camera. It doesn't have to be a fancy one. Most any digital camera today does the job nicely. So I want to get a number of pictures here of this so I can take it back to the studio with me so I can look at more detail. I have a little hint of reflection down here. It seems to be working nicely. I'm going to exaggerate that a little bit more. I'm going to put vertical strokes on this to indicate this reflection. Then I'll dry my brush off a little bit and I'll drag some horizontal strokes over it. Maybe even a couple. Add a little bit of white highlights out here. It's amazing what can be done with just so few colors. Just ultramarine blue, Indian yellow, and alizarin crimson. Get nice warms, nice cools, just about anything I want. I'm not against using a lot of other colors. For years I've used lots of other colors. I just happen to be in a phase right now where these few colors work well for me. I use the cadmium yellow very sparingly because I want these greens to be very vivid, these palmettos, but I don't want them to be overpowering either. I think I'm going to call it quits. It's getting a little chilly out here. This front continues to move in, but we've been fortunate not to get rain. I always carry this little box with me and a razor blade so I can scrape these paints off, put it in the box, and all we'll leave behind is our footprints and a few little raccoon footprints we've seen around here. So we'll pack that up now, go back to the studio in Clearwater, put a few more touches on this. Let's put this little mangrove back in the sand here. We'll give it a good start. Sarah and I have arrived back at the studio, so I'm going to take this painting, put a few more touches on it, and finish it. I got a pretty good start on this painting out in the field, so this was really the quicker end of the whole procedure, and here are a few of the changes I made. In this large area here, I went in and started to add a few more subtleties in this area, like the palmettos, tree trunk, and some highlights. The details add the icing on the cake and really make the painting fun, not only for the artist, but for the viewer. This painting was really a study in gray because it was such a gray day out there, and I knew it needed some highlights somewhere in the painting just to bring this painting to life a little bit more, and I talked about that in the field. So I added this patch of sunlight in the distance here on the water. I continued on adding a little more sunlight here on this path leading up into the woods. Then I cleaned up the curves around this path on the beach just to make this painting flow a little bit nicer. The sky was particularly interesting to me that day because it was just so gray it was hard to tell what color it even was. But I did keep the top part of this painting cool, and then down towards the horizon I left that a little bit warmer. I worked a bit more on the area around the horizon because as things go off in the distance they get a little bit more subtle, a little softer, a little bluer because of the atmosphere. So I worked here on these trees and made them a little bluer, and the tops of these trees are quite a bit softer. Since we had seen quite a bit of wildlife out there, and especially the osprey flying overhead, I tried to add the osprey up here near this palm tree, but it just seemed a little bit disjointed. It just didn't work quite right. It didn't tie together with the rest of the painting. So I added some birds down in this area, and the same thing, it just didn't look quite right. So I left this particular painting without any wildlife. There's always more that I could do to a painting, but I know my limits and I know my skill level, and at this point I think I better call it quits, because if I take it any further instead of the painting getting better, there's often a chance that it can go downhill, and I don't want that. So I'm going to finish this painting now by signing it and putting some varnish on it. I'll put it in a frame and we'll see what the end result looks like.
For more information about painting and travel with Roger and Sarah Bansimer, visit paintingandtravel.com.
If you would like to order a copy of this episode of Painting and Travel, or any one of the programs in the series, log on to paintingandtravel.com. Each DVD contains 3 programs and costs $19.95 plus shipping and handling.